Welcome to Phase 5 of the Fastbloc construction guide. During this phase, you will be constructing the first 4 rows of block and pouring the concrete into the wall. Please note that this video is a summary of the tasks to be performed. There is more detail provided in the manual, and you should familiarize yourself with those details as well. As long as you get your team organized, you should complete this in one day. If time permits toward the end of the day, you may start to build trusses. Standing the block and pouring concrete in the wall are the most important items today. First thing, when you arrive at the job site, go through your materials list and organize your work area. Clear the items off the concrete slab, organize your tools and sort the blocks, etc. Then measure and snap your chalk lines, 11.5 inches from the outside of the slab on every corner. This is the line with which your support frames will be aligned in order to make the walls straight. 11.5 inches is the combined width of the 8-inch blocks and the 3.5-inch wide support frames. Stop. Many people skip this step and face problems later. Check all rebar locations to be sure they fall on 16-inch centers and are 4 inches from the outside of the concrete slab. They must be within an inch of center. If not, they need to be adjusted by bending them to the correct location. This step is important due to the fact that if you don't adjust the rebar now, it will have the tendency to push your wall out of line. There is a rebar bending tool pictured to assist you in adjusting the location if need be. The vertical height of the rebar must be 91 to 94 inches above the slab. Shorter than 91 will need to be extended by adding a piece of rebar. The extension pieces should overlap the existing rebar by 16 inches and be tied in place with tie wire. Longer than 94 inches will need to be cut shorter. The optimum height is 92 inches. If any rebar needs to be cut, simply bend it down toward the slab and use the rebar cutter to cut it to the desired length. The cutter has a couple cutting locations, one on top for number 3 rebar and one on the front for number 4 rebar. At approximately 4-foot intervals along the slab, drive the wooden stakes in to support the frames. The top of the stake should be even with the concrete. Please use a scrap piece of 2x4 or an extra stake to lay on top of the stake you are driving, so as to not destroy the stake going into the ground. Identify the 8B support frames. Note that they are not symmetrical. The upright 2x4 are spaced 3 feet 6 inches apart on one end and 2 feet 6 inches apart on the other end. When installing them later, this will be important. Stack them inside on the center of the floor so that you will not have to lift them over the wall later. The tie wire used to tie the support frames together must be double thickness to be effective. Twist the wire as shown in the video. There is a QR code linked to this video in the manual. It is best to twist long sections 40 to 60 feet long, then cut them down to the desired length. This is what the twisted wire should look like. Locate the pre-made door frame and move it into the house and lay it flat on the floor. The nuts should be threaded onto the J-bolts only far enough that the bolt doesn't extend into the doorway. Install the first 2 rows of blocks starting at one corner. On the next row, offset it at the corner by 1 cell to allow each row to interlock the previous row, as shown. Mark the water pipe locations on the block with a large letter W, and cut a 2-inch by 2-inch hole on the inside of the block where the end of the pipe is. Lay the door frame in place, measure, mark and cut the foam block opening 1/2 inch wider than the door frame. Be sure the ends of the blocks are cut out at the door frame to allow concrete to fill up to the edge of the frame. Stack the 3rd row of blocks and cut the door opening to match the first 2 rows. The 4th row of blocks are a little different. These lintel blocks will have every hole without rebar plugged with a piece of foam to prevent concrete from filling the cells in the blocks. This saves you mixing a lot of concrete. Be sure to plug any cells that contain water pipes as well, since you don't want the pipes to be encased in concrete. Snap a chalk line 8 inches from the bottom of the block on the inside and outside the 4th block. This is where the tie wire will pass through when you tie the support forms together. The number 4 rebar is 1/2 inch thick. When installing the number 4 rebar in the 4th row of block, be sure that the 1¼ inch gray electrical conduit pipe is to the inside of the rebar, not the outside. If it is not on the inside, it takes a lot of work to fix as shown here. The wall had to be jackhammered open and a new conduit installed. Push the conduit up against the Fastbloc and secure it in place with a piece of wire toward the interior of the house. This ensures that the conduit can enter the bottom of the electrical panel that will be installed on the inside of the wall. Install the 3rd and 4th row of block, cutting the block on either side of the door form to accommodate the door form. Make sure that the opening is the correct size to maintain a total wall length of 20 feet 8 inches. Note that the 4th row is not the standard block, but is a lintel block that has a channel in the top. At the corners, carefully cut the piece of lintel block that is blocking the corner of the adjacent block. Use this piece to fill the open end of the block as shown and pin in place with double strands of wire. Stand your B-frames inside starting in one corner and matching the overlap with the A-frames all the way around the house. Note the position of the frames at the corners. The layout of the A and B frames should match so that the vertical 2x4 on the side will match between the A's and B's. It's very important that the B support frames be installed so that the upright supports will align with the upright supports on the A frames, as shown in this image. Note the placement of the B support frames. They are not symmetrical, so ensure that the spacing that measures 3 feet 6 inches between the vertical 2x4s match together. The vertical 2x4s that are spaced 2 feet 6 inches apart should go into the corners. They face opposite directions to ensure that the upright 2x4s of the A and B support frames are aligned with each other. There should be no space between the support frames and the Fastblocs at the corners. Install the A frames around the perimeter of the block walls and screw or nail them together. If nailing, leave the nail head sticking out slightly so that the frames can be easily dismantled and reused later. Stand up the door frame and proceed to tie the interior and exterior frames together using the wire you twisted together. Tie the frames together at each 2x4, including the corners. Tie each brace in 2 places, one 6 inches from the concrete and the other 8 inches from the bottom of the lintel block, where you previously made a chalk line. To tie, fold a 48-inch length of wire in half and poke each side through the Fastbloc. Normally the double strand of wire is rigid enough, but if you need to, you can use a piece of number 3 rebar to make a hole through the block. The Fastblocs should be tightly secured between the frames. In the small toolbox, locate a tool that looks something like this for twisting and tightening the tie wire. On the opposite side, twist the wire together. Using the tie wire twisting tool, pry the wire snug and then twist it until tight. Don't move on to the next step until the frames have been securely tightened together. On the inside of the wall, check that the B support frames are aligned with the chalk line you made at the start of the day. Align the frames with the chalk line the entire length of the wall, and then nail or screw the A-frames to the stakes on the outside of the house. Stretch a string line along the top of each wall to ensure that walls are perfectly straight. Install 12-foot-long braces on the top of the A support frames, as shown in the manual, to ensure that the support frames don't bend where they are connected together, and that they are straight. Check the square of the house. It needs to be as close as possible. The difference in the diagonal measurements should be no more than 2 inches. Once square, install 12-foot braces across the corners and secure with screws. Ensure that all 4 sides of the house are straight, and then brace with a 12-foot 2x4 across the corner as shown. Measure the length of the front of the house. It has to be 20 feet 8 inches. If it is longer than that, trim the blocks next to the door frame and use the frames to squeeze the wall together. Go around the house and find the pipes in the wall. You will need to make a foam plug to force these pipes toward the inside and make them touch the inside of the foam block. Make sure all empty or piped cells are plugged. Measure for your lintel rebar and bend it with the rebar cutter bender. If you start at the door, you will make 2 bends and no cuts. Using tie wire, tie the lintel rebar to every upright rebar. You may be provided with 6-inch pieces of pre-made tie wire pieces that can be used for this purpose. The lintel rebar and the vertical rebar should not be in contact with the foam block, as you want the rebar to be completely encased in concrete. Install upright 2x4s at the door opening to keep the concrete from running out. Locate and remove the upright rebar from the window locations. On the 4-foot window, you will have to move a rebar to one end of the window. Before beginning to fill the walls with concrete, take a few minutes to review previous pages of the manual and double-check to be sure all tasks were performed. Walk the entire house and double-check that wires are tight, walls are straight, and block cell holes are plugged. The walls should be secure and should not move if you push against them. Mix concrete in the wheelbarrows at a ratio of 5 parts sand and gravel to 1 part of cement. 10 parts sand and gravel to 2 parts cement works well in the wheelbarrows. Dry mix before adding water. It normally takes about 3 gallons of water per 10 parts sand and gravel. The concrete mixture should not be too runny, but just runny enough that it can be poured from a bucket. While pouring into walls, have someone bumping the foam blocks with their hand to allow the air to escape. Fill the blocks until the lintel rebar is covered, no more than 2 inches from the top of the block. Do not pour all the way to the top of the block. Clean up and head back to base camp. Good work.